Hello, everyone. My name is Sienna Brady, and I am a biology education major. The learning strategy that I chose for this assignment is called incorporating Realia. For the context of my classroom, it would be in a high school. I would most likely be teaching ninth grade, which would include a range of ages between 14 and 15 years old. The content area would be biology, and the specific topic that my lesson is on for this example is photosynthesis. Since I am not actually teaching a class right now, I do not have specific students to reference. However, in my SIOP, I did create like mock students whose first language was French in order to create materials that could incorporate vocabulary from a specific language, which you'll see a little bit of in this later in this presentation. The term incorporating Realia might seem daunting, but it is a learning strategy that many teachers probably use already without realizing it. Realia includes any real objects related to the content that the students are learning. There are many ways to incorporate it. Some teachers may choose to bring objects to show or present, especially if it's something that's a bit more fragile or heavy, like a typewriter. But others may do something different. An example of this would be bringing in different types of rocks when learning about the rock cycle, which just allows for students to actually feel and manipulate the objects, and just get more of a hands-on experience with it. Presenting information through diverse media as opposed to words on a presentation with occasional pictures do help make English language input as comprehensible as possible, which is part of what incorporating Realia does. It helps to build a bridge between the classroom and the real world by making the content more accessible to students like English language learners. Incorporating Realia encourages creativity by involving the senses in the learning process, especially when students are able to manipulate the objects, like the rock example. This um, this learning strategy has a variety of benefits. It can help vocabulary development, cultural awareness, engagement and motivation, visual and kinesthetic learning, and contextual learning, which is the main benefit that I will be taking advantage of in my lesson today. In my lesson, photosynthesis, this learning strategy will be used to help students understand the bigger picture of the process by using objects that they would see in everyday life. In particular, I will be using houseplants. To get the most out of this lesson, there should hopefully be a window nearby, which I do not have right now, but there would be in a classroom. And water, whether it's in a watering can or a water bottle, either works. If possible, each table of students would get a plant at their table. Um, but in this case right now, I'm just going to hold up a plant to do the demonstration. During the lecture on photosynthesis, I will reference the plant and have students help me demonstrate how plants are usually cared for, like giving it water and then putting it in windows to receive sunlight. I will demonstrate this lesson later in the video, but just for an example, this is the plant that I have, and I do have it labeled with a couple of vocabulary words that would be relevant to the topic. By incorporating Realia, students will be able to make connections with normal plant care to the process of photosynthesis. For example, many students will understand that we need to water plants already. This is a high school classroom, so uh, the majority of students will probably have had some experience with plants, with watering plants, something similar. So they can now connect this to the fact that photosynthesis requires water as an input. Ultimately, the goal would be for students to realize how they help plants perform photosynthesis, which allows them to better understand the process as a whole. The objectives for this lesson include students being able to identify the reactants and the products of photosynthesis and being able to use vocabulary associated with photosynthesis in oral communication. I So for the learning theory, I have Piaget's constructivism theory. His theory involves learners reflecting on their experiences, creating mental representations, and incorporating new knowledge into their schemas rather than passively receiving information. Part of this includes interactive exploratory environments, which would include something like incorporating Realia, even though it's not directly stated that way in the theory. I couldn't find a specific date for when his theory was written, but I did find a website which I cited that breaks the theory down. And I am now going to switch over to the other presentations that I can kind of model how I would teach this part of the lesson. So this is the beginning of the lesson. It just has a title slide and my name for students. I always will start my lessons off with the objectives for the lesson. This one does include all of the lesson objectives, not just the ones specifically related to incorporating Realia, because this would be the entire presentation that I would use for the whole thing. Again, I'm not going to play this right now, but this would be part of the lesson as a whole, which would start with an introductory video on photosynthesis just to get students engaged.
Living with opioid addiction.
Don't want that. Okay, so photosynthesis is a biological process in which energy from sunlight is captured and converted into chemical energy in the form of carbohydrates. Now, if you can see the picture on this side of the screen, we have a plant and it is receiving light energy from the sun. It is receiving carbon dioxide and it is receiving water. So everyone should have a plant on their table, or I have one up here. And what do we normally do to plants? When we have a plant at home or in the garden, what do? We water them. So, and then at this point, I would have water bottles or some sort of water at each table for students to actually water their plants with. Um, I'm not going to do it right now just because there's holes on the bottom of this, but that would be the representation there. Doing so will help students. Again, the whole goal of this is for students to kind of connect things that they already do and things that they already know to this process of photosynthesis. After we talk about this, then I will go into pointing to a windowsill, which will have plants at it, to then say, well, why do we put our plants by the window? To receive sunlight. And that is all because they need these things to carry out photosynthesis. Now, there are some things that we can't see, and that includes things like our carbon dioxide, which plants need to take in, oxygen, which plants release and that humans take in, and then glucose, which is inside of the plant, so we don't really have a picture of that. And then I will go into the importance of photosynthesis, which is again, the product or carbohydrates are used by other organisms as a source of energy, which is referring to our sugar or our glucose. This is the important chemical formula that everybody should know by the end of this lesson. Now, as I'm talking about this formula, I again will refer back to the plant that we have. So when I say it takes 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, I'm going to point out and say that this is the carbon dioxide that we, as humans and animals, we breathe it out, and then plants take it in. The 8 molecules of H2O, again, I will point back to our water that we have and say that this is the water that we're watering our plants with. And then light energy is referring to our sunlight. So again, I will point to a window if I had one and say, and the last thing that is needed is the sunlight that the plants are getting by placing them in the sun. And the two outputs are glucose, which again, those are inside of the leaf, so we can't actually see that. And then the oxygen, which I have over here with a little out arrow, and we as humans and animals breathe that oxygen in, and that is another importance of photosynthesis as well. And now the rest of the presentation is going a little deeper into the entire process of photosynthesis. So most of it is because it is a little deeper, I will do less of the referencing of the plant. But here on this, we would go into breaking down the photosynthesis into its two main parts, light-dependent reactions and light-independent reactions. And something important that is different between the two is that the first one requires energy from the sun. And that is, again, why we put our plants in the sunlight. The second one does not require energy from the sun, so that means the plant can do it even at nighttime when there is no sunlight available. And again, when I go into the inputs and the outputs, during those explanations, I would refer back to the plant if necessary, specifically for remembering, again, that we put water into our plants and that we breathe the oxygen that it is letting out. The next slide specifically goes into the light-dependent reactions with certain words highlighted, which are related to, there's guided notes that went with the larger lesson plan that aren't included for the smaller one, but I'm just going through just a quick rundown of the rest of the lesson that there would be. So then that is the first part of the photosynthesis. And I would have review questions in between that I would be asking the class. And then I would move on to the second part of photosynthesis, which is the Calvin cycle or the light-independent reactions, and break that down for students. Again, this is where we're bringing in CO2 from the atmosphere, which I could refer back to those little notes that I have that are attached to the plant. And this is also where glucose is made. And I will remind students that even though there is no glucose label on the plant, that is pretty much one of the biggest reasons why plants go through photosynthesis. We just can't necessarily see it. And again, there will be a couple more review questions and as well as a practice sheet. Again, that would be part of the bigger lesson, as well as a real-world application assignment, and finally an exit ticket. And that would be the entire lesson, but incorporating Realia more so is for the beginning part of the lesson. And at the very end, I might even ask the students to bring their plants over to the window and sit it in the windowsill. And just throughout the week or throughout the months of school, have students helping me water those plants just to kind of reinforce um, their understanding and have them remember that something that goes into this very important process that sounds very complicated is something as simple as water. And we partake in watering plants all the time. And that is it for my lesson that involves the learning strategy incorporating Realia.